It was 7 a.m. on a Bandh day in a small town in eastern Assam, in the northeast of India, 450 kilometers from Guwahati, 1000 kilometers from Kolkata, and 3,500 kilometers from Coimbatore. It was one of those many bandhs which is a regular event in that part of the country, called by either one of the political outfits or one of the separatist groups. A busload of school children of Air Force personnel at an Air Force station there stopped from going to a school which is 15 kilometers away. It's the first day of the half-yearly examination, and there are children belonging to various classes including class 10 and 12. The officer in charge of the station administration refuses to allow the bus, fearing for the safety of the children. The bus could be stoned, there could be a road roko, there could be a random shooting, or nothing could happen at all. But it was a gamble he did not want to take, even though knowing fully well that if the bus did not go, there was no other way the children could go to school. Because it is not any other kind of town in any other part of India where if the school bus did not go, the parents could not take the children in their private vehicles. It was around 7:30 a.m. I get a call from a very worried mother. I happen to be the wife of the officer who closed the gates. She's pleading with me to let the bus be allowed. When I heard her, reality hit me. Here is a mother who has weighed all the options, but still chosen to send her daughter, considering the future of the child. Now it was my role to play the mediator, but my husband did not budge. I played the future of the child card very loud and clear, and after much persuasion, he yielded. The bus left after an hour with additional security in the form of gun-trotting airmen. The mother again had to call up the school, and she told them that the bus was delayed, and again she had to request for permission for extra time so that the children could complete the paper. There is this anguish of the parents of the 30-odd children on one side, and the anxiety of my husband on the other, because he cannot rest peacefully till the bus comes back safe. Okay, forget the anxiety, forget the anguish of the parents. Imagine the psyche of the children who have to perform under such conditions. All the armed forces personnel who survived the 2004 tsunami in Andamans lost all their belongings. When I visited a family who had moved to Chennai after the incident, they did not have anything with them. Even the clothes they were wearing were borrowed. And it was not a miracle that saved them. When the tsunami hit, the officer was on his morning walk, and the wife was at home preparing breakfast. When she heard a very unusually loud sound of giant waves, she stepped out to see a wall of sea closing on towards her building. She did not spare a second thought. She grabbed both her sons, 6 and 11-year-olds, and started running. In between, she stopped. She didn't stop. She turned back to see the sea closing in, and she kept running. She has no idea how far she ran, how long she ran. She only stopped when the sea ceased to follow. She was not aware what had happened to her husband. The sea had engulfed her whole building and washed away all her household goods, vehicles, including a young mother with an infant who had climbed to the terrace of a building in the hope of escape. All those who survived were brought to the Air Force station in Chennai, and when the wife, along with her 2 boys, boarded the aircraft, it was with the thought that her husband was dead. But the officer reached Chennai the next day. He had climbed the nearest coconut tree when he saw the sea rush in. Being a Keralite and who had grown up around trees, he did that with ease. Otherwise, it is anyone's imagination. From Assam to Andamans, let's take a look at the paradise on earth, Jannat, Kashmir. When we were posted in Srinagar in 2005, Kashmir witnessed the heaviest snowfall in 15 years. The only lifeline to the valley from the rest of the India, 300-kilometer long Srinagar-Jammu highway was closed and all supplies were cut. There was no electricity, the water in the pipes had frozen, and food was restricted only to rice and dal. This continued for 8 days. If this was not enough, the same year, in October, Kashmir witnessed a major earthquake, the magnitude of 7.5 on the Richter scale. It was 8 a.m. on October 8th. My husband was away at work. My 2.5-year daughter had just woken up. She was sitting on the bed waiting for her morning glass of milk. I was in the kitchen preparing the milk when I felt a slight sway. It was a matter of seconds before the bottles filled with water started rolling down the kitchen counter and the swaying began in earnest. Well, it was not like I had read up on earthquake preparedness, but the least I knew was that in case of a tremor or earthquake, the best thing is to leave the building and stand in a vacant area. I wanted to pick up my daughter and leave the building. My house was on the first floor. The kitchen was on one side of the corridor and the bedroom was on the other. I had to take merely 5 steps to go to the bedroom. I stood there, I could not take even 1 step. I remained clinging to the wall and kept looking at my daughter sitting on the bed in the bedroom. When there was a slight gap, I somehow made it to the bedroom. I sat on the bed, hugged her to me. Then the swaying began, this time with greater intensity. My daughter felt something amiss and she started to cry. There was no way I could pick her up, carry her out of the house to safety. Just sat there with tears in my eyes, leaving everything to destiny. The household goods were rattling, some were breaking. I just turned away my eyes to look out the nearest window, and right at that moment, the roof of the nearest building caved in, and the building crumbled like a pack of cards. And then everything stopped suddenly. I got up, and I went out of the house. I didn't carry my phone. I didn't know what had happened to my husband. I kept pacing the road for 2 hours. Then when nothing else happened, I went back to the house. All the communication lines were dead. Slight tremors continued for quite a few months, so 5 or 6 months. I had a small bag kept packed. Few pieces of my jewelry, some cash, bank documents, and all our original certificates. Every time there was a tremor, we just picked up that bag and walked out of the house. In the midst of all this, terrorism was at its peak in Kashmir in 2005. Every bit of the 300 long kilometer stretch from Jammu to Srinagar were guarded by army jawans. And the areas within the city and in high threat areas, there was one stationed every 100 meters. Bombing, burning of buildings, encounters were the order of the day. It was on very, very rare occasions that we got to step out of the walled cantonment to enjoy the beauty of the place. We stayed very close to the army base hospital, and every time a chopper touched down the nearby helipad, we would always know that it was a casualty or an emergency, either someone injured or dead as a result of a shootout, or someone who's dead because of a cold stroke in the higher reaches. And there was much hesitation in us visiting the hospital for minor ailments because we did not really relish going there and seeing the many men lying there with leg and arm casts, chest, head injuries, many without fingers, without toes, which they had lost out of frostbite, and many without limbs. Well, what is this all about? You must be thinking, what is she waxing eloquent about? Don't people in the armed forces join to do this? I mean, what is the point if they are there to protect the country and safeguard the nation? Isn't it justified to lose homes, a few toes, a few fingers, limbs, or even lives? Very true. It is fully justified for the armed forces to give up their lives for the country, fighting the real enemy. In the case of Kashmir, how is an injury or death of a soldier justified when the injury is caused by a fellow countryman who works against the interest of the country? who does not appreciate living in a peace-loving country and who does not want to conform. Why does the armed forces have to keep on combating internal terror, keep fighting homegrown terrorists turned traitors for years, for decades, when such precious time could be used to work out strategies to fight the real enemy when the need arose? What then is the role of the government in listening to the demands of such people or reining in these terrorists or such forces? In the case of Assam, again, it's a beautiful place, as many people tell me with envy. True, but the threat, the perception of threat pervades every activity, every day. The condition is worse than war. Many people think the last war happened 15 years ago, so what does the armed forces have to do till the next one? Why do you need another country to wage a war when there's a warlike situation created by your own people every day? In the case of the Northeast, the armed forces is busy, not fighting external evil, but fighting to keep internal terror at bay. How do you deal with a situation where people of a state believe their freedom lies in its fragmentation, demand what is called full autonomy, and the government and the rest of the country just does not care? The Northeast is like the Far East, far removed from reality. The armed forces in Jammu and Kashmir, the Northeast, and the border areas of Gujarat and Rajasthan live in what is called hard area postings. Here, the wives and children of soldiers and officers choose to join because the family is the only distraction for such people here. And these, the wives and children do at the cost of sometimes the profession of the wife, good quality education of the children. There are stations where the families are not allowed considering the very high threat perception. When we get to lead, when we get postings in normal areas which we call peace postings, we enjoy a normal life. We go to the malls, we take our children to movies, send them to badminton and swimming classes. The experience that we see in threat areas teaches us to appreciate the normal things in life. Waking up to a peaceful morning, the ease with which we send our children to school, and the freedom to move when and where we like without the perception of threat. What we take for granted in peace areas come at a very high price in threat areas. We recognize this, and that is why we are able to live life beyond the ordinary. And that is why we party whenever we get a chance. Anniversaries, birthdays, to welcome someone to a new station, to bid farewell, generally to celebrate life. Life in the defense teaches you to take nothing for granted. It teaches you to value your todays and not wait for the tomorrows. There are a lot of people out there who pay a heavy price to ensure that we wake up to a peaceful morning, or we are ensured a peaceful sleep at night. They do not look for power, sympathy, or charity. For them, it is a call of duty. It would not be amiss to think of these people with respect, at least once in a while. I end with a dedication to an army officer who was killed recently in Srinagar. A wife loses her husband, 3 children lose their father, parents lose their son, the nation loses her soldier. So what? Don't people join the armed forces to die? It is in fact an authorization to die. That is why their deaths never make it to the headlines, but the deaths of insurgents do. So what? It is just another soldier death, another statistic. Why should anyone from the government mourn? Why should anyone even attend the funeral, even though it was held in Delhi? So what if we keep losing our brave hearts to a lost cause? No, it is not lost yet. We still believe in meaningful dialogue. We are staunch followers of Gandhi's non-violence. So what if another soldier dies a violent death? So what if we pour our grief out through the social media? That's all we can do, isn't it? We cannot make the dialogue lovers stop the killings, but we can make them understand that true Garv Vapsi is to bring back home every soldier who stands every 100 meters in sun and rain, in a few feet of snow, guarding a hostile state, a hostile people who don't even want to belong.